How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to yet another episode of Newscap. So now that we are 2 weeks into the Russia invasion, I wanted to address three essential questions in this week's video. So the first one I'm going to get into, which will probably be the longest segment of this video, is how have other countries responded to the invasion of the Ukraine? After we answer that question, we are going to go look at what are the economic implications for the rest of the world. And because I'm based out of the United States, I'm going to answer the third question of what are some of the other policy implications that the United States can expect or kind of focus on moving forward. And sorry I missed last week. I was out shooting the M2 50 caliber. Surprise, motherfucker. All right. So our first question is, how is the world responding economically to the Russian invasion? So there's been a lot of exciting things happening out of Europe. So a lot of these countries have now changed their official position of neutrality. So on February 27th, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said the entire European Union will close the airspace to Russian planes, including private jets. So up until that point on February 27th, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Romania, Poland, and the Czech Republic, to include Bulgaria and the UK, have already taken this step. So also on the 27th, the EU said it would buy and deliver weapons to the Ukraine, which this is super important because this marks the first time that the bloc has financed a country militarily while they were under attack. So the bloc, the European Commission, is also proposing to ban Russian-owned, Russian-registered, Russian-controlled aircrafts from taking off, landing, and flying in European Union airspace. So if you're trying to fly to Russia, well, you're going to go all the way around the world. On February 21st, when Putin announced that he was moving peacekeeping troops into the separatist regions that he then recognized as independent countries of the Ukraine, the Biden administration quickly announced sanctions that resembled the actions that were taken during the 2014 annexation of Crimea. These included bans on investment to, exports to, and exports from those regions of the Ukraine. So on February 24th, the United States and their allies announced a second, stronger sanctions package, this time targeting Russian officials, their families, state-owned enterprises, and two of Russia's largest commercial banks. The package included the expansion of the Foreign Direct Product Rule, or FDP rule. The FDP rule blocks the export of any product derivative of U.S. technology or software, regardless of its country of manufacture. The European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, including the United States, have all taken strict sanctions against Russia. But the most severe and coordinated sanctions came the following week on February 26th and 27th, which was the weekend. So this third batch of sanctions barred some Russian banks from SWIFT, which is the financial messaging system. It sanctioned the Russian central bank and announced the establishment of a multilateral task force to identify and freeze the assets of high-ranking Kremlin officials, to include Vladimir Putin. Now, I will get into details when we talk about specific countries, but Italy specifically has seized millions of dollars of Russian oligarch assets. Now, some countries are trying to stay neutral and not impose sanctions or condemn Russia too harshly in hopes that they can continue their cooperation in other parts of the world. So Turkey, which imports a third of its natural gas from Russia, has remained relatively quiet, but they did announce that they may begin blocking Russian naval ships from entering the Black Sea. Israel specifically has not really said much against the Russian aggression because they have a vested interest with the Russians in controlling the situation in Syria. Brazil, although condemning the Russian invasion, said that they are seeking to stay neutral in the conflict, in India as well, because India has a running history with the Russian government. And perhaps most importantly, Beijing has emphasized the importance of respecting one's boundaries, but has also recognized Russia's legitimate security concerns. So of the countries that we're going to look at in terms of what they are doing specifically, we have Germany, France, Finland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Croatia, Portugal, Romania, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Italy. So we're going to start with Germany. Germany is one of the world's largest exporters of weapons. They sit behind the United States, France, and Russia. And in 2021, German arms manufacturers exported products worth an estimated 10 billion United States dollars. So historically, the German government, old and new, have maintained the position that they will not supply weapons to war or crisis zones. Now, they do this because historically, obviously, Germans have been Central and Eastern Europeans suffering during World War I and II, and especially during the Nazi occupation of the other countries. Now, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz addressed the lower house of parliament on the government's decision to directly supply weapons to Ukrainian troops, saying among the highlights of that speech, he said, quote, "We need to support Ukraine in its hour of desperate need. There was no other response possible to Putin's aggression. It was Putin who chose this war, not the Russian people. So we must see clearly that this is Putin's war." And following his speech, Scholz tweeted, quote, "We will never resign ourselves to violence as a means of politics. We will not rest until peace is secured in Europe." So with that being said, on Saturday, February 26th, the German government announced its decision to provide 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 surface-to-air missiles from Germany's military stock to the Ukraine as soon as possible. So this is weeks after a similar measure was taken by the U.S. Germany granted permission to Estonia and the Netherlands to transfer German-made weapons to Ukraine. And this is a permission that has previously been denied. So this is really surprising. Putin's invasion actually spurred the Germans to boost their defense spending. So Chancellor Scholz said that the German government would now allocate 100 billion euros, roughly 111.8 billion US dollars extra for the German armed forces in the 2022 fiscal budget. So how does that compare to Germany's 2021 defense budget? In 2021, the entire defense budget of Germany was only 47 billion euros, which is 52.5 billion United States dollars. This increase represents more than 2% of Germany's GDP, something longed for by both NATO and the United States since 2014. That 2014 summit, all NATO nations agreed to contribute at least 2% of their GDP to defense by 2025. And as it stands in 2022, the only countries to achieve this landmark has been the United States, Greece, the UK, and Poland. Now, the Russian invasion has allowed Germany to reach this threshold. The Chancellor of Germany also said that the country had to quickly reduce its dependence on Russia as its energy supplier. So let's move on to France. On February 24th, France's President Emmanuel Macron addressed his nation saying, quote, "The events of last night mark a turning point in the history of Europe. We will respond to this act of war without weakness, with cold blood, determination, and unity," end quote. French Foreign Minister also said that France would reinforce its support for Ukraine in all its forms, but did not include additional details on whether or not this would include militarily. As of now, France has committed to sending defense equipment as well as fuel to Ukraine. Now, what are the British doing? More than 100 individuals and entities have been added to the UK sanctions list of what Boris Johnson has called the largest ever set of financial measures against Russia. This is designed to squeeze Russia from the global economy. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has promised that 570 additional names will be added to the list shortly. But Liz Truss was also criticized for saying that she would support Britain's going to Ukraine to join the fight against the Russians, saying, quote, that this is something the people can make their own decision about. The people of Ukraine are fighting for freedom and democracy, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe, end quote. But Dominic Grieve, the Attorney General, while David Cameron was Prime Minister, said that anyone going to fight in Ukraine would be in breach of a law passed in 1870 that makes it illegal to enlist in a foreign army at war with a country at peace with the UK. Violators of this law could be prosecuted upon their return to the UK. So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, really. I mean, your country doesn't want you going to war with a country that they're at peace with. So although there has been no evidence of this happening, Ukrainian President Zelensky on Sunday, February 27th, said that he would be setting up an international legion for volunteers. And as I'm recording this on March 6th, Zelensky has set that legion of freedom fighters up and is accepting volunteers for that brigade. So Belgium and the Netherlands will also provide weapons and protective equipment, with the Belgian government promising 2,000 machine guns, 3,800 tons of fuel, 3,000 additional automatic rifles, and 200 anti-tank weapons. The Netherlands will also provide 200 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. Portugal offered bulletproof vests, helmets, night vision goggles, grenades, and various calibers of ammunition. The Czech Republic is sending 30,000 pistols, 7,000 rifles, 3,000 machine guns, and dozens of sniper rifles, along with 1 million rounds of ammunition. Romania is providing fuel, body armor, helmets, and ammunition. Okay, so now this little segment of Sweden and Finland is super important to what will happen in Europe in the future, mainly because Sweden and Finland, of course, are not NATO countries. They have maintained the position that Russia is not as large a threat that the West and NATO largely was making them out to be. However, since they invaded the Ukraine and Russia single-handedly called out Sweden and Finland and basically made a threat against those countries, it has inspired the citizens of both countries to maybe cozy up to NATO. So I'll get into it right now. We'll start with Sweden. On February 24th, Russian officials publicly stated that Finland and Sweden would face, quote, serious military and political repercussions if they were to join NATO. So Maria Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, said, quote, Finland and Sweden should not base their security on damaging the security of other countries, and their ascension to NATO can have detrimental consequences and face some military and political consequences. Now, the following day, on February 25th, the Foreign Ministry doubled down on their Twitter page, saying, quote, we regard the Finnish government's commitment to a military non-alignment policy as an important factor in ensuring security and stability in Northern Europe. Finland's ascension to NATO would have serious military and political repercussions. Now that, to me, sounds like a threat, right? Now, they're saying if you join NATO, you can expect some military and political consequences. Now, for sovereign nations who have complete control over what their country does, how their country responds, Russia has no business telling those countries, you're gonna have some political fallout or military fallout. And to me, that's a threat, which should be taken serious. So obviously that message garnered a response from both Finland and Sweden, with Finland's foreign ministry Pekka Haavisto saying, quote, we have heard this before. We don't think that it calls for a military threat. Should Finland be NATO's external border, it rather means that Russia would certainly take that into account into its own defense planning. So the foreign ministry said, we've heard this before. Now, if we join NATO and we are NATO's external border, well, simply Russia would just have to plan for that. They would just have to plan for that. In Sweden, Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said, quote, I want to be extremely clear. It is Sweden that itself and independently decides on our security policy line, end quote. Now, according to the polls in both nations, Putin's threats have increased the support to join the defense treaty of NATO. In Finland, support to join NATO has grown to 53%, and in Sweden, 41% now show support for joining NATO, whereas 35% were against. Now, this marks the first time for either country that the majority now support NATO membership. Let me say that again. This marks the first time in both countries that the majority now support NATO membership. It is important to remind people also that Finland shares an 830-mile border with Russia. Now, a little scary situation here. On March 2nd, Swedish military scrambled as 4 Russian jets temporarily flew within Swedish airspace, an act that Swedish Air Force Chief Carl Johan Edstorm said he was very concerned about. Quote, this is unprofessional and irresponsible behavior from the Russian side, end quote. On February 27th, Sweden said that it would be sending military aid to include 5,000 anti-tank weapons, 135,000 field ration, 5,000 helmets, and 5,000 armored vests to Ukraine. Now, like many other European countries, This is the first time since 1939 that Sweden has sent weapons to a country at war. So let's move on to Finland. Finland, since 1956, when the Soviet Union returned a leased naval base that they borrowed from Finland following World War II, Finland has maintained the image of a non-aligned country, meaning that they militarily don't belong to NATO. They are independent and they remain neutral for the large part. But on February 28th, Finland announced a historical policy shift to send weapons to the Ukraine, promising 2,500 rifles, 150,000 rounds of ammunition, 1,500 rocket launchers, and 70,000 field rations. The decision of Prime Minister Sanna Marin on February 28th officially changes that neutrality position. Huge. Now, I'm sure Russia probably maybe anticipated that would be the case, but longstanding precedent determined that Finland and Sweden would remain neutral. They are not remaining neutral anymore. Denmark. On February 27th, Denmark announced it would send 2,700 anti-tank weapons and will let Danish volunteers join international brigades forming in the Ukraine to defend the Ukrainian country. I think that is freaking sweet. Good on Denmark, and I hope that the volunteers at least have some combat experience, or at least at the very minimum training for war scenarios. Norway, in addition to their contributions of helmets and vests, on February 28th announced it would be sending 2,000 M72 anti-tank weapons. Croatia is sending $17.5 million worth of protective gear and light arms. Slovenia promised rifles and ammunition. Italy, so Italy's playing hardball, right? Italy announced that it would send military equipment, but has yet to disclose further details of what that entails. But on March 5th, Italian police claimed to have seized villas and yachts worth $156 million from 5 prolific Russians who were placed on sanctions list following the invasion. The seizures were part of the Western strategy to penalize wealthy Russians to try and force Vladimir Putin to withdraw his troops from the Ukraine. Now, according to Prime Minister Mario Draghi, I apologize if I'm messing up these European names. I am American with an American accent, and I have never been to these countries, so I don't know the enunciation on these names. So bear with me. I apologize. According to the Prime Minister, the most valuable asset seized is a 215-foot yacht named the Lady M that boasts a $71 million price tag, and it belongs to Russia's richest man, Alexei Mordashov. $71 million price tag. Now, this may just be me, but if I buy a $71 million boat and it gets seized for things that I don't even have direct influence over, I'm not sure what I would do. I would be extremely peeved about that. And, I would probably take it up the chain and talk to Uncle Putin up there and be like, hey, man, I want my fucking boat. A second luxury vessel, the Elena, which is worth $54.5 million, is owned by a longtime friend of Putin, Gennady Timchenko. Once again, $54 million boat. Oh my gosh. That is just insane. Now, other Russian oligarchs have also had villas seized with a price tag of $72 million, $18 million, $3.2 million, and $8.7 million. Now, there's some concern over in Italy that without the summer tourism of these Russian oligarchs, that the Italian economy in these islands might feel the pinch. So what is the United States doing? The United States already announced that it was compiling a $382 million military aid package to Ukraine, bringing the total military aid from the U.S. to Ukraine over the past year to $1.93 billion. And since for 2014 to present day 2022, the United States has spent $2.5 billion on Ukraine. Now, 2 companies specifically that I'm invested in, one of them is based out of my home state of Arizona. It's Ammo Incorporated, which is a Phoenix-based ammunition company. They made the pledge to donate 1 million bullets to Ukraine, which has a retail value of roughly $700,000. Now, the more established ammo company that I also invest into is called Vista Outdoors. Now they own they own Eagle, Federal, Remington. I mean, basically every ammo manufacturer company out there, right? So Remington, CCI, Spear, and Federal Ammunition will be donating 1 million rounds of ammunition to the Ukrainian military as well, as long as the United States government allows this donation to go through. All right, so this moves us into our second question of the afternoon. What are the economic implications for the rest of the world? Now, the experts are saying that the global economic implications will largely depend on what happens to energy and other commodity prices. The United States, as the world's largest energy producer, is somewhat insulated, but Europe is vulnerable. Now, these sanctions are designed to ease the pain that the rest of the European country will feel. But when Russia provides 25% of Europe's oil imports and 40% of its natural gas, that is a pretty tall challenge. Without the Russian pipeline gas, Europe would struggle to obtain enough liquefied natural gas by sea because the leading exports of the United States, Australia, and Qatar are already shipping at near full capacity. Now, Europe could combat this by reducing gas consumption or bidding up the limited supply of liquefied natural gas on the market, which, drives the prices up. This comes at a time the United States, Europe, and other major economies are already dealing with the inflation crisis due to COVID-19, as well as some of the stimulus policies that were enacted. The U.S. Federal Reserve, as well as the Central European Bank, will have a tough time between combating inflation and maintaining higher job growth. It appears that Vladimir Putin anticipated that the U.S. would place sanctions on their banking system, and he took measures to build essentially a fortress around the Russian central bank. However, it was not the United States acting unilaterally in these sanctions, and the sanctions have come down from all different markets around the world. So these sanctions cover the U.S. dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, the UK pound, the Swiss franc, and essentially all reserve currencies except for the Chinese renminbi, which allows the Russians to most likely conduct business with the Chinese directly across monetary lines without having to use the dollar or any of those other currencies. Now, evading these sanctions is going to be tough for Russia because their trading partners like Brazil and India will obviously not be able to use the dollar as well because they're doing business with the Russians. However, they can use their local currencies, but the problem is that it has a limited liquidity. So the systems that Russia and China have in place may be of use for bilateral trades, and Russia is also likely to pay for some imports with its gold reserves valued at roughly $132 billion as of January 2022. Now, obviously, an escalation in the war would have detrimental consequences to the global economy. Russia has already said that being cut off from the SWIFT banking system would be an act of war on the West, but has yet to attack the West in any meaningful measure. Now, Russia, if desperate enough, could cut off all energy and commodity exports out of their country. However, that would be like a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It would negatively affect their country, whereas in Europe, the Europeans could lean on, the Asian Pacific allies over there, the United States, and they could weather that kind of storm. It's not so clear that Russia would be able to weather that. Another option that Russia has as well is to seize foreign corporate assets in Russia. So to date, I think there are 3,000 American companies that operate in Russia. Now, if they're operating in the Russian territory, the Russian government could go in there and seize all of their assets. That would be really interesting to see how that plays out. I am not familiar with what would happen if that's the case. I mean, typically nations go to war on behalf of their interests, and in the Western world, our companies are our greatest interest. It generates money, it creates jobs, and it spurs the economy. Now, if a hostile actor seizes that, is that a declaration of war? Beats me. We'll see if the Russians go down that route. But until a peaceful resolution comes out, global economies will continue to be jittery and leery. But continue investing because the market is on discount right now. Discount. We love discounts around here. This brings us to our final question of the day. What are some other policy opportunities for the United States? So the conflict with Russia and the Ukraine can offer a potential alignment of U.S. national security, economic, and climate interests that could cut right across the political divide. Although the sanctions are likely to be massively effective in the years to come, if the United States and the West really wanted to cripple Russia's economy and limit the resources that they have access to, they would drop the prices of oil and natural gas. Fossil fuels are about 50% of Russia's exports, and oil and gas revenues account for 30% of Moscow's GDP. The United States could encourage domestic and oil gas production in the short and medium terms while supporting green technology initiatives to reduce fossil fuel dependency in the long term. Now, I think that is a fabulous option for the United States to do. We should encourage energy independence, so when these situations happen, we're not worrying about importing oil or natural gas. We don't have to price inflations regarding gas. Now, I get that everybody wants to switch to a green initiative, but simply our infrastructure is not there yet, and solar and wind technology and power generation just simply cannot provide what we use. So instead of shutting down the Keystone Pipeline like the Biden administration did when they first took power, I think we should open that back up, encourage energy independence, and then incentivize corporations to become carbon neutral. And by incentivize, give them a financial incentive. So that way they are rewarded and it makes it worthwhile to become carbon neutral. And if you do that, capitalism will make it happen. People will create a way to make that happen if there is a financial incentive. And so this crisis is likely to reaffirm the importance of secure supply chains, which Washington and Western allies have been trying to address for quite a bit of time now. So policymakers across the globe can debate whether or not sanctions would have been effective pre-invasion of the Ukraine. President Zelensky of the Ukraine seems to have thought that if the United States were to have imposed financial sanctions before the invasion, that it would have stalled or perhaps prevented the invasion. However, it's a tricky situation when you start placing sanctions on countries for not acting a certain way, right? Everything has a cause and effect. You can't place sanctions on a country and kill their economy and not expect them to retaliate with potential war. Now, policymakers can debate this, and if they want to apply that strategy to China and place sanctions on China, well, China may very well lash out and do something militarily, whereas if we didn't place sanctions on China, maybe they wouldn't have. But now if, say, for instance, that China does invade Taiwan and we place sanctions on them and cripple their economy, well, maybe they'll play ball and withdraw their troops from Taiwan. I don't know. Those are the decisions that policymakers got to figure out. But just understand that in politics, there's always a cause and effect. For instance, Putin probably thought that Europe's dependence on Russian energy would deter a strong European response.
Psych! Gotcha, bitch!
So the question is, does Chinese President Xi Jinping believe that the world's reliance on Chinese manufactured goods and its large commercial and financial linkages would deter a strong Western response in the event of a Taiwan crisis? Like I said, who knows? Whew. All right. I am pretty sure I covered everything that I wanted to cover in this video. If you stay tuned until the end, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Go ahead and like and comment on the video and tell me what you guys would like to see for future videos. All right, well, until next weekend, whenever I make the next video, take care of your loved ones. I will see you guys next time.